The episode is called The Human Experiments.
The title is accurate, but to understand the human experiments, you have to understand the animal experiments first.
Because the animals came before the humans.
The animals were in the laboratory. The humans were in the mines.
One group had scientists watching over them, documenting everything.
The other group had foremen telling them to get back to work.
Before we talk about the conspiracy, we need to talk about the experiments.
Because they didn't happen in the abstract.
They happened in laboratories with actual animals.
800 mice, maybe more.
Over multiple studies, multiple laboratories, 28 years.
And I need you to understand what the methodology actually involved.
Okay.
Mice placed in inhalation chambers, exposed to chrysotile dust at 5 million particles per cubic foot.
5 million.
That's the threshold limit value. The amount Quebec miners were breathing every day at work.
How long?
15 to 24 months.
That's most of a mouse's lifespan.
Spent breathing poison. Then they'd watch them develop tumors, document the breathing deterioration, finally, autopsy.
Every mouse.
Every mouse. Dissect them, examine the tumors, prepare slides for microscopic analysis.
And then do it again.
Experiment after experiment, chamber after chamber, mouse after mouse.
These experiments had to be done to prove the danger to humans,
The suffering had a purpose.
to save human lives,
Except then they buried the results for 52 years.
which means the suffering became meaningless.
No,
It became worse than meaningless because every day those results stayed buried, more miners died. The mice proved it, and nobody told the miners.
that's the story of episode 23.
The Human Experiments. This episode is brought to you by Danziger and Dayano. The proof exists. They've spent 30 years getting compensation from mesothelioma victims and their families. Dandel.com.
February 1943. Leroy Gardner, director of the Saranac Laboratory in upstate New York, documents something extraordinary.
11 mice exposed to chrysotile asbestos dust.
9 developed lung tumors.
81.8%.
8 of them were malignant. And Gardner also documented 11 human cases from the Quebec chrysotile mines, lung cancer, mesothelioma. The connection was clear.
And we know what happened next.
The industry buried it.
For 52 years.
But here's what we didn't tell you last episode.
What?
Arthur Vorwald, staff pathologist at Saranac since 1934.
So he was there when Gardner did the research.
Not just there, assisting, observing. He knew about the 81.8% finding in real time.
Okay.
October 1946. Gardner dies suddenly. Heart attack, 57 years old.
Mid-experiment.
Mid-experiment. Multiple ongoing studies, mouse colonies actively breeding, research protocols half finished.
What happened to the mice?
1947, Vorwald becomes director.
He inherited the program.
The mouse colonies, the equipment, the funding, and Gardner's findings.
Go on.
1951, Vorwald conducts his own asbestos animal study.
Let me guess.
It was terminated too soon.
Excuse me?
That's the exact phrase. His obituary in Toxicological Sciences, written by colleagues, states that Vorwald's 1951 study missed the appearance of pulmonary tumors because his experiment was terminated too soon.
How do you terminate too soon by accident?
You don't, especially when you know what Gardner found 8 years earlier.
So he stopped the experiment before?
Before the tumors could develop, before there would be anything to report.
Like a terrible prequel to The Secret of NIM.
What?
Animated movie, 1982. Lab rats escape from the National Institute of Mental Health. That's what NIM stands for. And the experiments gave them super intelligence. They build this whole secret society.
And you're saying...
Gardner's mice just got cancer. The NIM rats at least got to be geniuses. These mice got tumors and a decades-long cover-up.
Significantly worse than the children's cartoon.
Way worse. What happened to the mouse colonies?
They kept going.
After Gardner died?
1951 through 1954, Vorwald ran a follow-up study.
With the same mice?
No. This time, they specifically used cancer-insusceptible mice.
Wait, they deliberately used mice that were resistant to developing tumors?
179 exposed mice, 181 controls. Even with resistant mice, the chrysotile exposed group showed a neoplasia risk ratio of 5.7.
Meaning they got cancer at nearly 6 times the rate.
Nearly 6 times. And this study wasn't published until 1995.
1954. Elvis walks into Sun's studio for the first time. By 95, Kurt Cobain's been dead for a year. That's your window.
41 years.
Who published it?
We'll get there. March 1957, AMA Archives of Industrial Health. Kenneth Lynch, Frederick McIver, and John Kane publish Pulmonary Tumors in Mice Exposed to Asbestos Dust.
14 years after Gardner.
14 years. Lynch had been documenting links between asbestosis and lung cancer since the 1930s. This was confirmation, not discovery.
And
Lynch's 1957 study was cited by Christopher Wagner in his landmark 1960 mesothelioma paper.
meaning it had scientific credibility.
Published in a mainstream medical journal, peer-reviewed, multiple authors from established institutions.
And
Nobody paid attention.
because Gardner's 81.8% was still buried.
Still buried. But there's more.
More experiments?
1942, Wilhelm Heuper, pathologist at DuPont's Haskell Laboratory in Newark, Delaware.
The chemical company?
The chemical company. He publishes a comprehensive textbook, Occupational Tumors and Allied Diseases.
What does it say?
It lists asbestos as an established carcinogen.
When?
1942.
1 year after Gardner's 81.8%.
1 year. And understand what that means.
A DuPont scientist documented asbestos causes cancer.
1 year before Gardner.
And the industry still claimed they didn't know.
6 years later, Heuper would become chief of environmental cancer at the National Cancer Institute. But in 1942, he wasn't a federal health official yet. He was a private sector scientist working for a chemical corporation.
Who published the truth anyway?
Who published the truth.
Seems relevant.
And there were British studies.
But of course there were, love.
1930s, Medical Research Council, MRC, with assistance from industry.
Oh, good. Industry assistance.
Various methods, various asbestos types. Results officially classified as inconsistent.
Why inconsistent?
Methodological limitations, species differences, and the fact that industry funding came with publication vetting.
They controlled what got published.
Turner and Newell, the largest asbestos company in Britain, challenged asbestosis diagnoses in the 1920s, ignored cancer data in the 1940s, tried to suppress Richard Dahl's 1955 study showing 10 times lung cancer risk.
Pattern.
And then there's Wagner.
Christopher Wagner.
October 1960, landmark study, 33 cases of mesothelioma in the Cape Province of South Africa.
That's the one that proved the connection.
That's the one. But here's what the telling of this story always leaves out.
What insignificant details got left out this time?
They weren't all minors. 22 men and 11 women, housewives, domestic servants, cattle herders, a water bailiff, children who had grown up playing near asbestos dumps.
Not just occupational exposure.
Environmental, residential, secondhand. Wagner proved that proximity to asbestos, not just working with it, was enough. Wives, children, neighbors.
1 generation of miners and everyone around them.
That's what made the paper extraordinary, and that's why the industry needed it buried.
And Wagner?
Kept researching, kept publishing, and in 1962, he had to leave South Africa.
Why?
The industry pressure was severe enough that colleagues feared for his safety. Rumors that his life had been threatened. He left for the pneumoconiosis unit at Llandaff Hospital in Wales.
For publishing scientific research.
For publishing scientific research that threatened a billion-dollar industry.
And then?
March 1974. Wagner publishes comprehensive rat studies. SPF Wistar rats. UICC standard reference samples.
What's UICC?
International standard, so results are comparable across studies. Multiple asbestos types, exposure periods ranging from 1 day to 2 years.
All types carcinogenic?
Crocidolite, chrysotile, amosite, and anthophyllite, all of them caused progressive fibrosis. All of them produced lung tumors.
And the industry claimed chrysotile was safe?
The industry claimed chrysotile was safe, but Wagner proved otherwise. But here's the finding that matters most.
Okay.
2 of the mesotheliomas occurred with only 1 day's exposure to asbestos.
1 day?
1 day.
We'll come back to that.
March 18, 1947. Marfrid Bowditch sends a letter to Vandiver Brown, general counsel at Johns Manville.
Yeah, I know the guy. What's in the letter?
Description of Gardner's findings: 8 mice out of 11 developing malignant tumors.
Gardner's 81.8%.
Exactly. 3 days later,
March 21st?
March 21st, Brown sends a letter to J.P. Woodward, blind copied.
What does it say?
I am very much concerned by Dr. Gardner's finding of lung cancer. This looks like dynamite.
Not, this needs more study.
Not, we need to verify this. Not, we should investigate further.
This looks like dynamite.
Recognition, not uncertainty. Recognition of what it meant.
And then what?
November 11th, 1948, Johns Manville Boardroom, New York.
Who's there?
9 companies, organized by Vandiver Brown.
Which 9?
Johns Manville, American Brake Block, that's ABEX, Asbestos Manufacturing Company, Gatke Corporation, Caseby and Madison, Raybestos Manhattan, Russell Manufacturing, Union Asbestos and Rubber, U.S. Gypsum.
The entire industry.
The major players. And they have one agenda item.
Gardner's report.
Gardner's report. And they vote.
On what?
Whether to delete all references to cancer and tumors from the report before publication.
The vote.
Unanimous.
All 9 companies.
All 9.
Vote to delete references to cancer.
To delete references to cancer.
From a scientific study.
From a scientific study, their money paid for.
That's not science. That's not even fraud. That's
Corporate editing?
bullshit.
Court exhibits PX 360 through 362 document the meeting. Vandiver Brown's enforcement, quote, "This is a point we will insist upon.
Insist upon.
All draft copies recalled to prevent documentation of what they deleted.
So nobody could compare the original to the censored version.
Nobody could compare." December 1948, Brown sends instructions to Vorwald,
The new director?
the new director. Delete cancer references. Emphasize that asbestos is safer than silica.
Safer than silica.
January 1951, censored report, published.
What about the slides, the actual microscope slides showing the tumors?
1949, young pathologist at Saranac, Garrett Shapers.
What did he find?
Gardner's cancerous slides.
The proof.
The proof. He mentioned them to Quebec industry officials.
And
1 month later, all the cancerous mouse slides had been lifted from the files.
stolen.
Stolen. Vorwald furiously reprimanded Skeepers for showing patently sensitive data on chrysotile carcinogenity to a foreigner.
Skeepers was South African.
Skeepers was South African. Quote from Skeepers' 1995 paper, quote, "I complied thereafter in the United States."
For how long?
41 years.
Speaking of buried records, Danziger and Dayano has spent 30 years finding the documentation companies thought they'd hidden, the exposure records, the internal memos, the truth. Dandel.com.
February 13th, 1949. Asbestos, Quebec.
The town.
The town. 5,000 workers walk off the job.
Why?
January 12th, Burton Ledoux publishes an exposé in Le Devoir. Quote, "Asbestosis, a village of 3,000 souls suffocates in dust."
They were breathing it.
Falling like heavy rain. Jean Marchand, General Secretary of the CTCC, the Confédération des Travailleurs Catholiques de Canada, leads the strike.
How long?
137 days.
4.5 months.
May 6th, 400 heavily armed provincial police arrive.
What happened?
180 miners arrested, beaten with guns, tear gas, billy clubs.
And the church?
Archbishop Charbonneau delivered a sermon March 5th, raised $500,000 plus $75,000 in food for the strikers.
That's extraordinary.
It is. But Premier Duplessis pressured him to resign. February 9, 1950. Exiled to Victoria, British Columbia.
For supporting workers.
For supporting workers. The strike ended June 28, 1949. Partial victory, better wages, some safety improvements.
When did Gardner find the 81.8%?
February 1943.
6 years earlier.
6 years.
So when those miners were striking,
Gardner's proof already existed.
when they were being beaten by police,
Gardner's proof already existed.
when the archbishop was exiled,
Gardner's proof already existed.
who knew?
Vandiver Brown, J.P. Woodard, the 9 companies at the November 11th meeting. Vorwald.
And the miners,
The miners didn't know.
the families,
The families didn't know.
the mice knew.
The mice knew.
But let me tell you about Penjay, South Africa.
The asbestos mill.
Children's job, jump up and down on fluffy raw asbestos fiber inside large shipping bags to trample it down.
As young as 12.
12 years old, jumping on asbestos, breathing it with every bounce.
While Gardner's slides sat in filing cabinets.
And this ties into the lungs being smuggled across the border somehow too, right?
Yeah, 1944 through 1958. The Johns Manville lawyer driving organs across the border.
In his car trunk. Internal documents.
In his car trunk. Secret lung harvesting from dead Canadian asbestos workers. By 1958,
70 plus unreported lung cancer cases.
70 plus. Families never informed.
And Sabarin?
1949. Sheppers confronted him in a local restaurant in Quebec. Sheppers asked him, "Why do you do this? Why do you oppose the rights of asbestos workers to claim compensation after their lungs have been destroyed?"
What did he say?
"Because I'm paid to do so."
He just said it.
He said that. Sheppers pressed him. "So you're telling me you're a crook?"
And
"That's right."
he admitted it.
And then Sheppers said, "You're a Catholic. It's the Christian belief that you help the man who has fallen down."
Strong statement.
He said, "I go to church every Sunday and say my prayers every night. I can't reverse what I've done."
He knew what he was doing.
He knew exactly what he was doing.
How many American workers were exposed between 1943 and 1964?
Part of the 27 million exposed 1940 through 1979.
27 million.
27 million.
They had proof in 1943.
They had proof in 1943.
That's why the mice knew before the miners.
Let's go back to Wagner's 1974 study because I want you to understand what 1 day's exposure actually means.
Okay.
SPF Wistar rats, specific pathogen-free, exposed by inhalation to UICC standard reference samples.
Standard samples.
International standard, so results are comparable across studies. Multiple asbestos types, exposure periods ranging from 1 day to 2 years.
And 2 mesotheliomas occurred after 1 day.
1 day, 24 hours in the inhalation chamber, then removed from exposure entirely.
How long did they live?
Normal rat lifespan, 18 to 24 months.
So they breathed asbestos for 1 day,
1 day,
lived for 2 years,
lived for 2 years.
and developed fatal mesothelioma.
Fatal mesothelioma.
What does that translate to for humans?
A wife shaking out her husband's dusty work clothes. Once.
Lifetime risk.
A child playing in an attic where someone installed insulation. One afternoon.
Lifetime risk.
A teenager working a summer construction job. Single shift.
Possible death sentence.
The industry spent decades claiming safe exposure levels existed. Threshold limits. Acceptable doses.
Wagner proved there was no safe level.
Wagner proved 1 day was enough. 1954. Scheepers becomes director of Saranac Laboratory. He finds Gardner's handwritten notes in some of the original slides.
Some.
The cancerous ones had been lifted, but enough remained to document what Gardner had found.
And Scheepers sat on it.
For 41 years.
Why?
His explanation in the 1995 paper, the slides had been stolen when he mentioned them in 49. Vorwald furiously silenced him. When Vorwald left in 54, fired, he took 8 tons of records with him.
8 tons? No way.
Scheepers would later allege, in litigation testimony and in his 1995 paper, that Vorwald left with 8 tons of records, hundreds of files, all the animal protocols, all the slides, patient records, photographs, x-rays.
Scheepers couldn't publish without the evidence.
And the evidence was in Vorwald's possession.
Until when?
Litigation discovery, 1980s, asbestos lawsuits, court orders. Documents finally surfaced, and in 1995, April, Scheepers publishes.
1943 to 1995.
52 years.
52 years from Gardner's discovery to public disclosure.
Long enough to outlast the men it killed.
2 generations of workers died while proof sat in filing cabinets.
So let's count. Gardner, 1943. Huber's textbook, 1942. British MRC studies, 1930s through 40s. Vorwald studies, 1951 through 54. Lynch, 1957. Wagner, 1960 through 74.
The human experiments, plural.
The plural is justified.
It wasn't one suppressed finding.
It was a pattern, systematic, international, spanning decades.
Multiple laboratories.
Multiple countries.
All finding the same thing.
All suppressed by the same industry.
Here's what I can't stop thinking about.
I'm listening.
800 mice, maybe more, deliberately exposed to lethal doses, monitored as they developed cancer, watched as they died slowly.
The experiments had to be done.
I know, to prove the danger to save human lives.
But then,
the November 11th, 1948 meeting, 9 companies, unanimous vote, delete all references to cancer.
the suffering became meaningless.
No, worse than meaningless, because the miners were still breathing the same dust, the children were still jumping in the bags, the teenagers were still working summer construction jobs.
1 day was enough to kill them.
1 day was enough, and the mice proved it in 1943.
The mice proved it in 1943.
And the workers were proving it every day after that with their lungs.
The other experiment.
The mice knew before the miners.
Next episode, we follow the paper trail, because for decades, the asbestos industry claimed they didn't know it was dangerous.
But the documents tell a different story.
Internal memos, medical studies, executive correspondence.
Everything they tried to hide.
Episode 24, The Paper Trail.
For 52 years, proof sat in filing cabinets while workers died. The experiments worked. The mice showed what asbestos does. And 9 companies voted to delete the cancer references.
Paul Danziger, founding partner at Danziger and Dayano, spent 30 years documenting what the industry tried to bury. In 1998, he and his law partner took on hospital purchasing cartels. His partner died mid-case. 12 years later, Paul wrote the screenplay that became Puncture, starring Chris Evans.
That's Captain America Chris Evans, premiered at Tribeca Film Festival.
Yeah. A film about his partner who died fighting for safer medical devices.
That's the kind of firm this is.
Rod Dayano used to work for Jones Day, one of the largest law firms in the world, defending corporations in product liability cases.
He walked away to help people who needed representation.
Over $1 billion recovered later, he calls it the best decision of his career.
Larry Gates is senior client advocate at Danziger and Dayano. His father, Dan, worked the Shell refinery in Pasadena, Texas, came home covered in dust every day. Larry grew up 3 blocks away.
In 1999, Dan was diagnosed with mesothelioma, dead 6 months later. Larry's words, "I watched him wither away from a strong, active man into a skeleton." Now, Larry's 72, fighting his own cancer, and still helping other families fight theirs.
Dandel.com. That's DANDELL.com.
Nearly $2 billion recovered, over 1,000 families helped.
30 years of dismantling the architecture of denial.
Are you all right?
I don't know, that one hit different.
The mice.
Yeah, the mice. Which is weird, right? We've talked about 27 million workers, children jumping in bags at age 12, secret lung harvesting.
And 800 mice in chambers?
800 mice in chambers got me. I know that's messed up. I know the human cost is.
It's not messed up, it's how people process things.
There's actually research on this. People donate more to save one sick dog than to feed 100 starving children.
Because the dog has a face, a story. The 100 children are a statistic.
One death is a tragedy. 1,000,000 deaths is a statistic.
Stalin said that. Horrible person, completely right about human psychology.
And the mice? They didn't choose this. They didn't apply for the job. They didn't know what was happening to them.
Complete innocence.
24 months, breathing poison, slowly dying, while humans watched and took notes.
For science that could have saved millions of human lives.
Should have saved millions.
Should have. November 11th, 1948. 9 companies, unanimous vote.
Delete all references to cancer.
So the mice died for nothing.
Worse than nothing, they died and then the proof got buried for 52 years while more people died.
The mice knew before the miners.
The mice knew before the miners. That line's going to stay with me.
Good, it should.